This is Actar's Reviews, from anime to figures and beyond.
Hey, this is Actar and you're watching another episode of Actar's Figure Reviews. This time it's back once again to Digimon Frontier for more rare and off-the-radar Digimon figures. Now, long-time viewers of this channel will be familiar with cancelled Digimon figures that see a limited release in other markets. As mentioned in previous reviews, Digimon toys are notorious for performing poorly in Japan, and the lines usually get cancelled halfway. This trend seems to be continuing even with the latest Digivolving Spirits line of figures. However, many a time, perhaps to recoup their losses, these figures still see a limited production in other markets where Digimon toys are more popular. Some of the examples that I've previously reviewed on this channel include the Warp Evolving Savers toys that only saw a release in Korea, and the Spirit Evolving Loemon and Kaiser Leomon figures that saw a release in both the US and Asia. The same cannot be said when it comes to Bandai of America. Digimon toys have proven extremely popular in the West, so 99.9% of the time, any and all original Digimon figures produced or announced by Bandai of America see a release in the States. But what about that 0.1%? Well, you see, to my knowledge, there were only ever 4 figures in the entirety of the US Digivolving toy line that never saw a release in the States, and they all happened to come from Digimon Frontier, perhaps due to the waning popularity of the series. I mean, it is considered one of the most controversial and least popular series in the franchise, what with that whole humans turning into Digimon thing. Do check out my Spirit Evolving Loemon figure review for more on that. Whatever the case, those 4 figures were Chackmon to Blizzarmon, Duskmon to Loemon, Aldermon to Kaiser Greymon, and Beowulfmon to Magna Garurumon. While they were advertised on the backs of US packaging, they never made it to store shelves. Instead, they eventually saw a release in Asian territories. And today, we'll be taking a look at the Slide Evolving Chackmon to Blizzarmon figure. Now, many of you guys know that I'm not usually a fan of the Bandai of America original Digivolving toys. The reasons are, number 1, they're usually not very good, let's be honest. And number 2, they don't capture the spirit of the transformations from the show. For the Frontier line, most of the figures transformed directly from their spirit modes to their Digimon modes. Not only is it inaccurate, most of the spirit modes are pretty much just the Digimon figures doing yoga. So if that's the case, why on earth did I buy this figure? Well, other than to do a review, of course. That's because in the show, we see the characters slide evolving directly from their human spirits to their beast spirits and vice versa all the time. And this figure promises to recreate that in toy form. And yes, because of the aforementioned reasons, I don't think I'll be tracking down the Aldermon to Kaiser Greymon or Beowulfmon to Magna Garurumon figures anytime soon. Not to mention, we already have brilliant figure representations of all 4 of them. Now, the thing about my figure is that it's second-hand. Not only has it seen better days with regard to its paint applications, it didn't come with its packaging. Note that it was released in both English-speaking and non-English-speaking Asian countries, so there are 2 versions when it comes to the packaging. From what I understand, there are no differences when it comes to the actual figure itself. Alrighty, and on to the main review. Starting off with Chackmon mode, it's actually not that bad. While I'm not that big of a fan of the choice of a stoic expression, the proportions are great and the kibble isn't as bad as it could have been. They did try their best to hide as much of the Blizzarmon mode as possible, including the head and hair, and they did put in the extra care and attention to turn his forearm guards into Chackmon's snowball launcher that does hide much of the Blizzarmon torso. Still, there's really no getting around the fact that Blizzarmon's arms and legs are still as plain as day. In fact, the arm kibble is particularly egregious as it gets in the way of Chackmon's articulation. Truth be told, the correct transformation of the kibble has you position the Blizzarmon shoulders above Chackmon's arms. While this does free up the arm articulation, it looks absolutely horrendous from the front. So, I guess you'll just have to pick your poison. Whatever the case, for a limited figure, they did an absolutely stellar job of not skimping on the paint. Unlike some of the other US figures, pretty much all of the molded detail is painted in. Sadly, his articulation isn't as noteworthy. Of course, I can't really blame the figure itself, as you have to take into account both the transformation requirements and Chackmon's short stature. Even moving Blizzarmon's arms out of the way, we only have very limited ball joints for the shoulders. They can only move about this much, and in and out this much. The elbows can bend inwards, but it does break up the sculpt, and that's mainly for the transformation. And as for the legs, you can get his legs to move forwards and backwards if you mess around with this entire system of joints. His feet can also technically move forwards and backwards, but once again, that's more for the transformation. Speaking of the transformation, let's take a look at Tomoki in his beast spirit form. Chackmon, Slide Evolution! Starting from Blizzarmon's legs, we unpack them from the back, flip up Chackmon's feet, rotate Blizzarmon's legs around, and straighten them out. Fold up Chackmon's arms in front of him, and pull the entire front of Chackmon's body forwards to reveal Blizzarmon's head. Pull Blizzarmon's head out, close up the plate that will become Blizzarmon's back, rotate Blizzarmon's head and peg it into place, rotate his hair around and lay it across the back. Chackmon's snowball launcher splits in half to become Blizzarmon's gauntlets. Flip out Blizzarmon's fists, and last but not least, we collapse his shoulders into his body. The Blizzarmon mode is an absolute beast in more ways than one. Firstly, I have to compliment the figure on doing an excellent job on managing to capture that drastic change in silhouette and stature between the two modes. The Blizzarmon mode towers over the Chackmon mode and is rather accurate. Though technically, this figure is one of those hide the entire alternate mode on the back type of figures. Yeah, there's really no getting around this, is there? Still, the entirety of Chackmon's body is relatively integrated into Blizzarmon's back and doesn't really affect the rest of the limbs. Unfortunately, all of this back kibble could have been mitigated further if they only found a way to extend his hair ropes so that they hung over the back in a more accurate fashion. Interestingly enough, you can actually use Chackmon's feet to support Blizzarmon's knee joints in the event that they get too loose. Aside from the back, the Blizzarmon mode honestly looks really good. Once again, everything is pretty much painted in, including the minuscule golden earrings, save for the claws and the tuft of fur on his hands. Speaking of his hands, notice that they are molded as if they are supposed to be grabbing onto something? Yup. Sadly, he does not come with his signature tomahawks. Even if you were to borrow a couple from your friendly neighborhood Get-A-Robo figure, the lack of any holes in his fists prevent him from holding onto them. So sadly, no double tomahawk boomerangs for him. Lastly, let's get into articulation. Unlike Chackmon's, it's excellent. His hair is on a double joint, one hinge joint and one ball joint at the head. His head is technically pegged into place, but you can unpeg it to make him look all around. Thanks to the transformation, you can pull the shoulder away from the body to take full advantage of that ball joint and hinge joint. The arms can rotate at the shoulder, the elbows are double jointed, though they can only afford about 90 degrees of posability. The forearms can also rotate. As for the legs, they can move forwards and backwards, in and out. They can rotate side to side above the knee. And as for the feet, they are on full ball joints. And that ball joint is on a hinge joint, but once again, that's mainly for the transformation. So, while his poses are indeed limited thanks to his lack of accessories, all of that articulation is still appreciated nonetheless. In conclusion, it's a real shame that they never made more Slide Evolving figures, but I'm pretty sure they only made this one because it was physically possible. The sad thing is, with this figure, we pretty much have a figure rendition of all the main characters save for Fairymon. While I like to pin this on the gendered nature of a boy's toy line, having a scantily clad female character in a line where you essentially dress them up and strip them down might have been a bit too much, even for Japan. Regardless, if you're a Frontier fan, a fan of Chackmon, or a fan of Blizzarmon, I would definitely recommend tracking this figure down. Not only is it a rather good figure in its own right, it actually makes sense within the context of the show. On top of that, while it is indeed quite rare, it doesn't really go for that higher price on the secondary market, due to the low popularity of the character, I suppose. So, this is Actor saying, see you guys in the next episode.